Welcome to this next session. This one's called A Conversation Between the Sexes. And just to make sure that it's evenly distributed, you can see that you have two of each, two women and two men. Now, that is not necessarily a full reading of everything one could say by any means about sexuality. So let's just be very clear about the definition here. This is a conversation between two people who happen to be women and two people who happen to be men. We're going to co-chair it on the grounds of fairness. And one of the things that we were just discussing, Henry Kissinger once said that the reason why you will never solve the battle of the sexes is because there's too much fraternizing with the enemy. But then we all agree that Henry Kissinger has an awful lot to answer for, including that quote. But really, this is a kind of an informal and, it depends how serious or lighthearted we get. Let's see. But it's an opportunity for us to talk to each other about some of the questions that baffle or perplex or really bother us. And so each of us is going to introduce ourselves in the way that we see fit. So my name's Jude Kelly. I'm the Artistic Director of the Southbank Centre. I have a boy and a girl, and I think of myself as currently and so far heterosexual. But I'm 58 and there's a long way to go in my life. I became a feminist when I was 20, and I've been at various stages, strong or weak, in my living out of that story. So that's me. My co-chair is?
I'm Michael Kaufman, and I've been active for the past 30-something years, working to engage men and boys, supporting gender equality, working to end violence against women, working to transform our ideas of masculinity. As you can probably hear, I'm not from here. I'm from Toronto, Canada. I'm married with 2 kids, married to a woman. We're allowed to do married to whoever we want in Canada, I'm happy to say. I think a lot of my concern and my excitement about being here, I'm here at WOW, give some talks about my book, The Guy's Guide to Feminism. But I'm excited by this panel because part of what we have to think about in terms of gender transformation, gender equality, is understanding that gender is not just about half of us. We are all gendered. That's part of our experience of the world, the way we see the world as women and men. So, the division here, of course, is, female, male, half and half. But in terms of our gendered experiences, as Jude was saying, we've got, 1,000 different gendered experiences in this hall right now, so.
Hello. My name's Shami Chakrabarti, and I'm the Director of Liberty, the National Council for Civil Liberties. And the Sun newspaper once called me the most dangerous woman in Britain. So there you go. Thank you. Thank you. That's really kind. Thank you. So not to everyone's taste, and I have a boy child who is nearly 11, and I think that's a really serious responsibility for a feminist, because I guess, mums can fuck up their boys and make them bad boys for other women to cope with later on, right? Possibly, we're not taking responsibility for that. We are. Well, some nods and some stern looks from the audience, but you'll learn to love me, I promise. What else do you want me to say, Jude? You want me to say that that I'm a feminist, perhaps not an ideological one, because I haven't read all the tracts, but I will make time one day, I promise. But I'm a feminist of experience, and I'll shut up.
Thank you.
I'm Jon Snow, and I'm a journalist. I work for Channel 4 News, and I'm paid to disguise my opinions. But on this liberated experience, I'm allowed to express my opinions as I like. I was born into a male household, 2 brothers, 1 father, and a very oppressed mother. My mother had alopecia totalis, which meant she had no hair, a condition my father didn't notice, but which she did, and tended to see me as her ally. So I feel to this day that I'm in touch with my feminine side. She thought I was a lot better than I really am, and my father thought I was a lot worse than I really am. So I was much influenced by my mother, and not very influenced by my father, or so I think. And ever since I've lived with feminists, I had a long partnership with the mother of my children, and she's a serious spare ribbist. We had 2 girl daughters. They're now in their 20s. I'm now married to another woman who's also a feminist, and I try my best.
Okay. Now, you may be thinking, oh, this is cheating. All the guys here saying they're feminists. Where's Jeremy Clarkson?
I didn't say I was a feminist. At no point have I said I'm a feminist.
You're quite right.
I said I've lived with them, and I try my best. That's a very different thing.
That is absolutely
Any
true.
man who says he's a feminist, I think, has got a very great deal to live up to.
Gordon Brown says he is.
Well, Gordon Brown,
Yeah.
Henry Kissinger, they've all got a lot to answer for.
Anyway, we didn't invite Jeremy Clarkson. We may invite him to WOW next year, and I'm being flippant and not flippant. This isn't really about, you know, confrontation and sound bites, etc. So in a sense, you have to have some common ground in order to discuss some of the areas that seem to have gaps. And also, nobody here makes their money out of their personality being projected as misogynist or sexist. I mean, and whatever Jeremy might or might not feel, and I don't know him, certainly his bank account relies on him perpetuating that idea. So that's why we just didn't want it to be. It's not a row. So I'm going to ask the first question, and it may seem trivial, but I'm 5'2", and Shami, how tall are you?
5'1".
That's why I invited you. No, and this just occurred to me because you were both tall.
Size isn't everything, Jude, if we're talking about the sexes, by the way.
No, and we were standing getting a cup of tea, and I had that experience that I so often have as a woman, and that's especially if I'm not wearing my high heels, which is that the men are taller than me by and large, and always taller than me by and large, and I often wonder, the experience I often have is that I have to sort of make them look at me, make them look down at me, and on the very rare occasions when I'm looking down on someone because they're a child or they're sitting down, I'm very aware that actually my whole psychology is slightly different. And over the years, I've been in, you know, standing functions, etc., where I felt that the men are slightly irritated at having to, if you like, me making them draw attention. I have to draw them to my attention and almost will them to stay there because they would like their eye lines travel back up again. And you know, John, you're nodding there. I'm just wondering whether that experience of literally talking down to lots of women colours any of the feelings that men have about them.
I don't really know. I mean, when I meet a man taller than me, it's a very, very daunting experience. And looking up at somebody is an unusual experience. I mean, I had to anchor the Paralympics, and obviously I had to talk to a lot of people in wheelchairs or who were somewhere on a lower level physically. I found that actually rather a liberating experience. There's something awful about kind of having to stand up and talk to people like this. There's something really nice about being able to talk to people like this. Now, I wouldn't do that to a woman necessarily, but well,
unless you're proposing.
You know, you tend to do this, you know, and kind of this and this, you know. I mean, there are ways of contorting yourself down. The fact is, for me, probably for Michael too, it's actually something which happens with both sexes. I'll tell you a very quick story. I had to interview, I will not name him, but he was an extremely prestigious, rather overweight businessman who owned a major retailer on the high street. And I was in his office waiting for him, and I was sitting in the chair like this, and the other chair was there, and there were two crews. And he walked into the room, and I got up. And as soon as I got up, I realized I'd made a terrible mistake, because he undoubtedly suffered from small man syndrome. And it was downhill from there on until he, in fact, pulled the plug on the camera and kicked me out of his office. And there are men who feel that. So it's not a unique thing, and I think women have a huge advantage, actually. I think the world...
Yeah, that's what I've always thought, John, that women have a huge advantage.
I think it's true.
No, go on. Why?
Well, first of all, they don't have to go around trying to find out whether anybody makes trousers with a 35-inch inside leg. That's a problem. You've actually got to go to America or Canada to get clothes off the peg. You don't think of these things. It's a trial.
Okay, but Michael...
And you know that my shirt comes out? By the end of today, my shirt will be out, because nobody makes long enough shirts.
Or maybe just people can't take their hands off you.
But here's the thing. One of the issues is that we have, as men and women, we have internalized images of ourselves. Yeah. Now, Jude, we met once before up there for lunch. If you had asked me on the phone a week ago, how tall am I, Michael? I would have said, I don't know, I would have come up, 5'8", 5'10", because you're a strong woman, a powerful woman with real presence. So for most of us, we don't sort of, I don't think we look at the world that way necessarily. But we do have internalized images of ourselves as women and men. And that's because we're bombarded with images of what it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman. And we carry that stuff, and that stuff really plagues us in many different ways. In many different ways.
Yes.
What is your mental age, Jude?
Well, I suppose 58.
What?
Well, my age is my age.
No, mental age.
Your mental age.
I don't know.
But I'll let you just say, mine is 23.
Right, well, I was going to say
genuinely.
playfully 24.
I was 17 not so long ago, but I'm now 23.
Right.
Now, I'm serious about this.
Yeah.
I think people do have a mental age, and I look at you, and I see you as somebody, although you're significantly younger than I am, I see you as somebody much more mature than I am, somebody with much more balanced and reasoned views on the world than I have. And that's something which transcends anything to do with stature.
Yes.
Well,
listen, I wasn't really addressing my insecurity. I was just noticing the issue of power and height.
Yeah.
It's not to be resolved in this issue.
No, seriously, can I cut in on that? Because I was just thinking, as you spoke, because initially I thought, oh, this is all slightly irritating. We're just talking about superficialities about people's height. And then I reflected that my not yet 11-year-old son is now almost my height. And it's happened quite quickly, and it's really quite disconcerting. And if I'm honest, it's not just superficial at all. It makes me kind of anxious about authority and coping and all of that stuff. So,
we'll move on from this topic, but I think the one thing I wanted to raise is that I know that when tension arises between men and women, men might be drawn towards drawing themselves up to their full height, and you do notice as a woman when that happens.
Well, and I've seen men who'll do that. I remember one man I used to teach university, and there was one professor who was very pro-feminist, pro-equality, but he had a way. He was a tall, large man, and he had a way of just like leaning over women in an incredibly intimidating way that he wasn't aware of the space that he took up. And I think that issue of the space that we occupy is a big one.
Yeah, being aware of it.
Yeah.
No, okay, your question.
Yeah, no, I'm wondering, we're here as a dialogue between the sexes, and I'm thinking of, with an 11-year-old son, right? How do you think that he is thinking about girls differently than, let's say, I did when I was that age, coming into a world where girls around him are achieving as much or more in schools? How is that dialogue of the sexes happening at that age?
The impression that I get is that some things change and some things don't change enough, and it's all very. I'll give you an example. A few years ago, my son, who has a very jolly time at school, he's bizarrely got really quite good social skills and. Really quite a popular kid. But anyway, he came home and he was quite upset. And And a rather more macho boy had teased him for not being one of the football crowd, and for not being that kind of the people who occupy the space and play football, and everyone else is in the corner of the playground. And this other kid had said that my son was a girl because he wasn't into football. He would rather sit and read his book or play, imaginative games. And my son was kind of really quite upset about this. And so I said, OK, don't worry, I'll just go and beat him up tomorrow. I won't embarrass you. I won't tell a teacher, or I'm just going to go and beat him up. And my son said, Mum, you can't do that. And I said, no, I can. I reckon I could take him. I reckon I could still take him. He's only kind of 9. I could. Anyway, so my son had a laugh, and then he said, "No, Mum, I want your words. I need to fight this boy with words." And I said, "Well, you could try saying, what's wrong with being a girl? Yeah. What's wrong with being a girl? Half the people in this school are girls, and your mother is a girl. What's the problem?" Anyway, he apparently tried this out, and it worked.
Really?
Yay!
Yes.
And he was, and he's not had any problems with this particular kid, and actually they've become pals. And so I think that all of that dogma and all of that shit about girls and boys and men and women is still there, but there are these other voices and these, the arc of history is a long one, but ultimately it bends towards justice, right? I didn't say that. Martin Luther King but it sounded good.
John, can I ask you a question? You said to me earlier that you thought that men basically feared women's power in case men were found inadequate, or found out almost. You suggested that men would be found out for being inadequate if they revealed themselves to women. Is that what you meant?
It wasn't exactly what I meant. I think men... my impression is that men try to exclude women very often in the workplace because they do fear that they could be overtaken. They want to keep it their way, and it's very comfortable to keep it that way. But the truth of the matter is that constantly one is brought up short, and you realize that in fact women will very often be doing a much better job of what needs to be done, and partly because they don't find the need to do what men need to do together to impress each other. And that's but I think in a much wider sense men do feel insecure about women, and often the worst behavior is an expression of the worst insecurity. Boorish men are probably the most insecure men. They're having to overdo it in order to impress and make up for what they know they don't have. And I mean, I've been thinking about dear old Mrs. Thatcher, because, at some point, sometime in the distant future, we'll have to write about her and we'll have to try and assess how she did it. And I think that the men that sat round the cabinet table felt extraordinarily inadequate to deal with what they'd got. And funny enough, I was talking to a German about Mrs. Merkel, and they said, even though Mrs. Merkel's a very different kind of character from Margaret Thatcher, there was the same problem, that men didn't know really how to deal with it. And the trouble, too, was that they would, I think, imbue Mrs. Thatcher with thoughts she probably never had. I think they sometimes looked at her down the cabinet table and felt that she was saying, "Kenneth, have you washed behind your ears? I say, really, those fingernails." That nothing of this was said, but there was a feeling that she, kind of was looking at them and saying, "What a shower you are." And they were.
But that idea that women might be as good or better than men, and therefore men would find out.
Well, better's a very loaded word, isn't it? But
Okay,
but I think, might do a much more effective job, more efficiently, with less fuss, with less noise.
But that's not really what I'm hearing from what you said, because what I'm hearing you say is she's mummy. And they've got a problem with mummy.
No, they've got a problem. I'm not saying it's her. That's not her problem.
No, but they have a problem with somebody at the end of the table who is an authority figure who is mummy. That's what you're intimating.
I prefer the word matron, but
well, whatever word you want to, is cool with me. But how does, as a woman, how do you deal with that? How would you advise a woman to deal with that?
Advise us how to help men not feel that.
Well, it's a very difficult thing to suggest, but to be perhaps collegiate and allow us in.
But we're incredibly collegiate.
Yeah, you're collegiate together.
This is really good stuff, isn't it? It's no, this is really good. But we leave you out.
Do you feel that women leave men out?
What?
Do you feel that women don't allow men in?
Not a question of not allowing men in. It's that they've got something going, which is generally pretty good. I mean, it's a very, very interesting thing. I mean, I can't get into detail, but a very male man left the workplace that I'm in. And, everybody is supposed to contribute thoughts about the individual before they go. And a quarter of the newsroom didn't want to contribute. And I'd never noticed that this was the situation. And that quarter was almost entirely women. And I've been raking through my mind to find out why that is the case. Why did I miss it? And I think that they managed this thing between themselves, whatever it was.
Well, it was a female conspiracy.
No, not at all. No, in many ways it was a mutual support process. That's not a conspiracy. That's something brought about by necessity.
Okay, so there's a solidarity that you feel is perhaps lacking amongst men or between men and women?
I don't feel any solidarity with men, I must say. Most of my friends are women for some reason. I don't know why. I find women easier to talk to. Men are not easy to talk to. They don't really want to talk about it down here, right down. They'll talk about, and that's why they love talking about football. Talk about football and you don't have to talk about anything at all. What a gorgeous situation. That is the perfect situation. Football is the perfect place for the male mind. Perfect.
But I think that's because men carry enormous fear about being real men, about living up to the expectations. I think a lot of that fear is actually fear of other men discovering our secret, that we're not, always tough and always in control, and that we actually have feelings. And so men have created these, elaborate clubs, we call parliament, and we call the church, and we call it, and corporations. And what they do is they disguise exactly what you're saying, John, this enormous fear of closeness, fear of revealing ourselves. And so, many men will grab onto that external object or utilize things like workplace harassment, which seemed to be what you were hinting at in terms of that colleague, to sort of show that, we are better than, we are different than, we are, we're able to conquer. So I think a lot of those behaviors that are so horrible and so hurtful to women, they're simultaneously mechanisms of power and control over women, and paradoxically, at the exact same time, a sort of a desperate display of power by those who feel they don't have it. It's a really dangerous combination when you put that fear in the hands of those who have power, and look what they end up doing.
Well, Michael's absolutely hit the button. That's where I'm coming from when I say that, men fear women. If you want to sub it down to that, I think that's why. I think there is a sort of fundamental insecurity, and I want to hang on to that football thing because I feel excluded by it. I don't like football. I'll go along with it and say I support Brighton and Hove Albion. I've only ever seen one professional football match in my life, and I would pay good money never to see another one.
And he could get good tickets too. Right?
Shami.
It's really interesting because, this does obviously, I don't know what people in the audience think, ring true on an emotional level, but on a sort of political level, it's almost absurd, isn't it? Because on an emotional level, everything you say resonates with me. Men aren't in touch with their feelings. Men have to be strong. That's an enormous pressure. Men don't have the kind of intimacy of friendship and solidarity with other men that we enjoy. They feel left out, blah, blah, blah. And yet, these clubs that you're talking about are the clubs of power in the universe, and we feel a little bit left out too, you know. So, a little bit. So what's the you know, you've all got to do therapy or something because you know, we're getting a little, you know, we feel sorry for you, but not that fucking sorry, do you know?
Well, I think you're very close to a serious conundrum, and that is that, you know, men are still needed for procreation in some cases. You know, of course, there's AI and there are all sorts of other things. But I mean, you know, there are heterosexual women who enjoy heterosexual sex, and therefore men have some role in it. But the downside.
No, I'm not trying to say that. Yeah.
No, the downside is the rest of the baggage. Yeah. And you know, if I want to talk about the things I feel really vulnerable about, I will only talk to women. Right. Although I must admit, I've been to a male shrink, and I found that interesting. I had thought I once had a female shrink. I didn't think that was a good idea at all, because actually I spent my entire time trying to charm her, whereas the man just hasn't taken any shit at all.
Mm-hmm. But he was daddy, and...
No, he wasn't daddy. No, he definitely wasn't daddy. I think he was younger than me, so that was the start.
But this feeling, I mean, what you just said about, okay, you know, there's the fear, and then there's the bonding together over maleness, even though it feels insubstantial in some way, and there's the need to hold on to power, even though you don't necessarily like it either, and all of those sorts of things which you said are toxic, which is a good word. And I mean, largely women love men. You know, they love them for lots of different reasons and lots of different kinds of relationships. But although you're saying that, and I meet men who say it, it's very hard for women to be as collegiate as they want to be, because men won't take the next step, which is, this is what we feel and we want to change. At least they may say it on an individual level, but there hasn't yet been a male movement that's gone, right, you know, how can we all do this change? And so what I feel is that, strangely, although, you know, women may feel, you know, as if they've had a tough background, there's something very exhilarating about women's consciousness being on the move, change moving towards greater sense of self-power, whereas men obviously feel the opposite. The opposite of draining away, of losing something and not replacing it.
Well, think about one of the great slogans of the women's movement in the 60s, the personal is political. Yeah. And the idea that, and part of the inspiration to me as a pro-feminist man was this idea of how do we both challenge our dominant social structures that are oppressive to women, that are oppressive in many different ways to different people, but at the same time understand that we internalize oppression, that we take our definitions of manhood and womanhood into our developing brains. And so it becomes, you know, it becomes these internalized mummies and daddies, but in the worst sense of the word. And so one of the things that was exciting for me growing up in an era where all the women I knew were feminists is the way they were challenging themselves, not just challenging the world, but challenging themselves to rethink who they were, how they thought. And that did inspire a lot of men. And I know when I see my son, who's now 32, the things, I mean, he's not a pro-feminist activist. He does his, you know, very different stuff than I do. But the stuff that he and his buddies talk about, I mean, they watch football and they do all that stuff, but they also will talk about their feelings in ways that when I was his age, we could only imagine. And so I think there are those positive changes. But, you know, I think that we have learned, and particularly our generation, you know, in our 60s, we were battered. I don't mean physically battered. I certainly wasn't. I know some men were. But men were raised with humiliation for having feelings, for showing emotion. So it's no wonder that many men feel more comfortable talking to women, because they're not going to humiliate us for opening up. And I think the fear is, but it's only a fear, that other men will. The truth is, though, as soon as men start to do it, those other men have waited their whole life for that possibility of reaching out to other men.
Well, I mean, the problem is, although that may be happening at one level, the power structures have not really moved. People celebrate the fact that Marjorie Scardino was one woman in the top 100 CEOs. I think there are now 3. Well, that's a completely intolerable state of affairs. And the House of Commons, I mean, it's antediluvian for all sorts of other reasons, but the fundamental abuse of human rights that leaves a situation in which women are outnumbered 4-1 by the body that is supposed to set the standards, set the regulations, live the life, set the example, debate the issues. How can 4 men and 1 woman sort out a absolutely equal sense of how something has to be resolved?
Absolutely.
Okay.
What?
Well, then,
Absolutely.
Let me ask a question of you both as men, because this was what I don't understand. I watched, Ad Afterworth this morning was talking about a particular moment in Tahrir Square a couple of years ago when women were taken into prison and their virginity was examined, theoretically to check, whether they wouldn't be violated in prison or not. But I mean, it was an abusive and horrible, humiliating harassment, and I burst into tears watching it on television. And really, my tears were, well, why don't men like us? Why do they dislike us so much that they actually like hurting us? And this was a feeling of, well, if you value us as much as you're all saying you do, not only why aren't you speaking out more? Why aren't you...
But you're too generous to think that men like hurting you. They don't know they're hurting you half the time. They actually think, oh, this is what should be done. I'm not saying that the Egyptian thing seems extreme, but, I mean...
Well, it used to happen at Heathrow Airport in the 1970s to Hindu brides, so it's extreme, but it's...
But, I mean, the reason there are no women in the House of Commons is because the men want to be in there with other men. It isn't because they hate women so much they do everything possible to stop them getting in there.
But, John, this is what I don't understand, because why do they want to be there with other men when you and other men get...
much safer.
But you say you get so much more in terms of nurturing and understanding and blah, blah, from women.
But
and
the
yet,
herd business has these guys joining up, going in, and within 3 or 4 years, completely part of it.
So it's like it's like a dehumanisation process that happens when you organise?
Well, look at the number of broken marriages, the number of drunks, I mean, it's a fabulously dysfunctional place. Some of the social, well, we're seeing them enacted in front of us, some of the social disasters that flow from being a member of Parliament. Ask any researcher, do you want to be a member of Parliament? Almost invariably they say, it's one of the most horrific things I've ever observed.
All right, but my question is, why aren't men who know all this is happening, why aren't men speaking out more to men about men's behaviour? Why isn't that happening?
Well, for me, I mean, a lot of it does... I think a lot of it goes back to the fear that I was talking about. The fear of appearing, appearing as not a real man. I think that underlies a lot of it. I think a lot of it would require them questioning themselves, questioning their own behavior, questioning their own attitudes. But the good news is that more and more men are. I'm really fortunate. I get to work around the world. And there isn't a country in the world right now in which there are not men working for gender equality, working to end men's violence against women, and in some cases, I mean, risking their lives to do so. And it's totally inspirational for me as a man to see my brothers doing it. So, yes, not enough are. That's my work, to try to figure out how to make more of that happen. But it is really exciting to see that more and more men are breaking that negative solidarity, that patriarchal solidarity, and beginning to challenge other men.
Well, I think you live in a nice place. I mean, Canada's a nice place to begin with. I mean, because it's a slightly more enlightened society to some extent, although you've got a pretty, how should we put it, a tough male prime minister.
Yeah, horrible.
Sorry.
Yeah, horrible.
You might say that. I couldn't possibly comment. But,
okay.
So let me jump in with a question for Jude. Jude, you've worked as a director, pretty male-dominated profession.
Yep.
Did you? I don't. It's not a question about all the obstacles you faced there, but thinking about a dialogue of the sexes. I mean, I think partly what we dialogue for is to understand what we can each contribute to our knowledge as human beings. What do you think that you brought to that some of your male colleagues didn't, or do you think that some of your male colleagues had a worldview or sensitivity that many other men didn't, perhaps?
Right. I am aware that it is very likely that the female characters in the plays that I directed will get more attention and scrutiny if I am directing than if a male colleague is directing. I mean, that's a generalization, of course, but I would say from my observation, particularly Shakespeare, the characters, there's usually 3 or 4 women, but they are nearly always cast in a very particular way by male directors and then sort of boxed in a particular way, so they do become very stereotypical. And I think that, you know, a woman will look at the psychology of a woman character and go, well, what is it really? What's really going on? And I have to say, just in Shakespeare's defense, he's never let me down. As a great writer can write for both genders, I believe. Or some of them can, and he certainly can. So one thing is you bring a sensibility about the fact that women have huge capacity for complexity, including the fact that they're not necessarily virtuous. Because one of the most irritating things in drama is that you're not a protagonist and you're virtuous, or you're just, you know, downright evil. And so the sort of simplistic idea that you're either a mother, a whore, or a virgin is the reductive thing. But unfortunately, that is often what ends up it feeling like. So I think that's what you bring, which is a knowledge of women.
Boy,
could I ask Shami a question?
Yeah.
Shami, I mean, you are one of a now very large number of NGO leaders. It's an extraordinary thing, but the NGO community in the last 20 years has become woman-dominant in terms of its leadership. Indeed, the night before last, I was at a fundraiser for Inquest. The entire team is women, and nobody could say that inquests are women's work. So I'm wondering why you think that is, and what have you managed to do in the NGO sector that hasn't happened in the rest of society?
Good question.
That's a very good question. It's one I think about a lot, and I think the short, glib answer is politics is so horrible. No, politics is so horrible that maybe people are pursuing their ambitions for change of the kind that we're discussing in that sort of seemingly safer, more neutral space. Though once you start making an impact, it becomes a little bit less safe, and then the politicians have a go at you. But in my experience, but I think that may be part of it. And just it's values driven, it's collegiate, it's it conjures up all of those warm feelings about nurturing. You can be angry, you can be organised, but you can still be in a sort of nurturing, values driven environment, as opposed to the cut and thrust of politics. I think that's really what I think is going on.
Why can't that be harnessed into driving a woman candidate into Parliament? I mean, if women got together
I think
at the
right,
constituency
John.
level and seized the high ground.
I always say to younger women, do as I say and not as I do. It doesn't matter what their politics and what their party, and whether I agree with them or not. If I see a bright young political woman, I'm always trying to encourage them to go into politics. But that said, goodness me, they're in for a tough time. I mean, the stuff that, I keep going back to this, and you talked about it before, but the stuff I have seen in the Palace of Westminster would be absolutely actionable in any workplace in this country, in terms of the bullying and the harassment and the sexual harassment and the vileness. I mean, you wouldn't want your son, let alone your daughter, to experience that, and it's not just in politics. I think it's aspects, parts of the private sector and elsewhere as well.
Take comfort, the Vatican's worse.
Well, we'll never know. But the thing about your question, I think it's a great challenge, which is that if women want to influence society at root and branch level, do they have to take hold of the levers of power and change them?
Yes.
And I think they probably do. And of course, if we are fearful, and let's just talk about fear from a woman's point of view, I can't speak on behalf of any other woman, I know what I think. My fear is that when men have conveyed to me over the years that maybe I'm not as good as I think I'd like to be, you do internalise it, and you always have that feeling of, well, maybe I'm not. And I know that's meant to.
If it's any comfort, I have worked for editors who've eternally told me I'm not as good as I think I am.
Yeah.
And that's how they keep me in order.
But do you believe them?
I do.
Well,
okay.
Well, listen, I'm not saying that this is particular to women. What I'm saying is that women show an unnerving amount of self-deprecation, and it's not ironic. It's real, endless apologies, endless worries, etc. And I think women are trying to tackle that and assert in an appropriate to an appropriate level without being sort of, too egotistical. But I think that not only do we fear having to struggle, being the pioneers in a very, very difficult world, which Westminster is or Parliament is, but then, you do also fear that suddenly you'll discover that you're out on a promontory too far and you won't know how to cope with it. So I think that women are trying at the moment to support each other, develop more confidence, and that's our responsibility. We have to do that. And then I think you're right, we have to be braver about going into places that we might not like in order to change them, because we can't ask men to change everything by themselves any more than the other way around.
One question I have for both of you, what do you need from men in terms of both at a personal level, at a level of social change? You mentioned one thing, of course, more men speaking out, but what do you need from men?
On a political, social level, more solidarity, as Jude has said. More of what you're describing. The feminist men who they should look at that. They should look at the Supreme Court, the House of Parliament, the magic circle. They should look at that and feel as outraged as previous generations felt about apartheid, because it's that appalling. It is the most. My job is all about seeing injustice everywhere, but I think now, as a sort of middle-aged woman looking at the world, it is gender injustice that is the most appalling. And people are quibbling about whether you should have women on, women quotas on boards. It's just so at a political level, I think greater priority and solidarity in relation to that injustice. On a personal level, I don't know, a bit of kindness would be nice sometimes. And more of the honesty and the vulnerability, perhaps, that you two are both prepared to express, quite generously to a group of strangers. A lot of men can't do that, even in family life.
I think the difficulty is that some of it has to be done by fiat. I just don't think it's going to accrete naturally. I think that women quotas for political parties did have some effect. It did bring in a number of women MPs. It's more or less dried up, but Stella Creasy, I think, came in on an all-woman shortlist. But, for example, it ought to be possible to call a moratorium. I mean, they're not going to reform the House of Lords, so the best thing is to use that as the test bed.
Absolutely.
So you just say there will be no men appointed to the House of Lords for the next decade. And in that time, only women will be appointed, and that will then bring up complete parity.
Yeah.
And we'll see what happens when we have an upper house which is completely balanced with, there are 880
Absolutely.
people in there, most of them men, but we'll have 400 of each.
John, I agree with you. I mean,
and you could just do that with an act of Parliament.
Absolutely. I mean, this was not. Well, look, when I was younger, I was a young sort of a student of constitutional law, and I took the classic liberal position. We want a meritocracy, as if the status quo is a meritocracy. I don't want to be a beacon. Do you know what? Now I'm a token, not a bloody beacon, and I'm just really angry and impatient. And I think, given that it is so deep and so unjust, and it's gone on for centuries, and it's all over the world, I think you're right. We need radical, structural, almost revolutionary change of that kind, just to catch up a little bit.
So I think you're allowed to have a petition now, and if you get a certain
petition.
number, aren't you allowed?
No, I don't want a petition. I want a fucking revolution.
Okay.
While you're cooking the revolution, you could get a petition. I think it's is it 100,000? Once you get that number of people, they have to debate it.
Right.
Okay, I'm going to answer the question, and then I'm going to ask you the same question, really.
What about them out there?
No, we're not going to do that this time. No, only because we're going on to a next session.
Oh gosh.
Which is that the political. I think we've said the same thing, but on a personal level, I would like men to be more doubtful. To express their doubtfulness.
You mean to reveal our doubts?
No. Yeah, because I think perhaps men think that women also want certainty, but I don't think women do want certainty in a man. I think they just want openness.
One of the things that
What do you want from us?
Yeah, this is interesting because I, aside from writing, I speak to groups for a living. And so often when I'm speaking in a school, in a community, there'll be men, who are sort of have to be there, basically. And I'll watch them, and they'll come in and they'll sit back, and they'll scowl at me because they know what I'm talking about. They think I'm just going to crap on them for the next 2 hours. But I tell stories. I tell stories about my life as a man. I make fun of, in the way you were too, about the expectations. And I watch those guys because they're my barometer. And I watch as they, I'm talking about how we can't live up to these expectations of manhood. None of us is ever going to be tough enough. None of us is ever going to have, a big enough dick. I mean, whatever it is, we're just not going to fit in. So I watch those guys, my barometers, as they drop their chair, and then their arms go down, and then very carefully, so their buddy doesn't notice, they start nodding. And what I realize is that those men, all men, actually have waited their whole life to hear another man say that this stuff, that these expectations of manhood are just total crap. So when you say, and it's beautiful hearing you say that, that you want more vulnerability, you want more openness, you want more doubt by men. Men actually want that too, but we're just, most men are too scared. And so what we need to do as men is, in a sense, hold up a mirror to our brothers and say, this is what we actually look like, this is what we actually feel, this is what we actually know about ourselves. And as soon as we do that, those men have waited their life to do it. And it's wonderful, because at the end of a talk, when people come by to say thanks, some of those guys will do this sort of drive-by thank you. They'll sort of walk by really quickly, and they'll just, as they're walking by, go thanks like this. They're still a bit scared, but you know that what you've done is been able to voice what they felt their whole life, but they thought they were the only man on the planet who felt those things too.
But we need to learn from wow, because actually you couldn't have this meeting. I know there are some men in the audience, but fundamentally you would never get a gathering of men to sit down and talk about what women need, or what women perhaps deserve and have a right to. We just wouldn't do it. Somebody might find out. I mean, it would be a very, very uncomfortable event. And what I would say one wants from women is that they should reach out to us, not in a way that tells us how rotten we are and what an awful job we've made of it and isn't it scandalous and the rest of it, but in a way which says, I liked what you did just then. Have you ever thought perhaps what we could now do would be this? I mean, there have to be a bit of a conspiracy. You have to pick us off. I mean, we have to be picked off. I think that's really the thing.
And we'd have to call it
we are in very solid silos.
Yeah.
And we feel really insecure about dabbling with that situation.
We'd have to call it world of men and boys, womb. Of course.
And we're envious. Let's be candid.
Yeah.
I mean, walking into this place, I felt a profound sense of envy. Yeah. I thought, why can't this happen between us all? Yeah. Why does it take wow? Yeah. Why must the last letter be a W?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I think I have said that we're doing a Festival of Masculinity next January. And I don't anticipate it's going to be of this scale, and I don't anticipate it's going to be easy. I think it's going to be much, much harder. But then there hasn't been, first, second, and third wave of, masculinism, or whatever it would be called. But I think that it has to begin. And it is beginning, as you say, all over the world. But I was going to ask her, we have our strengths, but we also have our weaknesses and our bewildering qualities. And, do you think, what do women do that actually make it more difficult to operate? What would you like of us? I mean, you said be careful and tender, I think, understanding and generous. Reach out. But is there anything you'd like us to stop doing?
Can you imagine?
Not that we'll obey. I'm just asking.
Can you imagine how bad we feel? We brought you the banking crisis. We brought you the war in Afghanistan. We brought you the war in Iraq. I mean, that's men's work. I know there are women in the armed forces. I know there are women diplomats at the UN, but fundamentally this was boys' stuff.
Yeah,
boys' stuff.
I agree with you, and yet men aren't a uniform bloc. I mean, I don't know about you, but I spoke out against those things, and I'm guessing even if you weren't allowed to on your show...
I had no opinion on it.
Yeah, we know that. But
listen, this is all great, but you're not answering Jude's question. You know, Jude asked you a difficult question, which is that, what would you like us to stop doing? You said reach out and be tender, and then you're saying all the right things, which is great, and I believe you, and this is the right place to say them. But what should we stop doing? What are we doing that's contributing to the problem rather than the solution?
Yeah.
God, I'm thinking about football again, and pom-poms, and, you know, dancing girls and all the rest of it. You know, the only feminine input is behind the bar and, you know, the entertainment in the interval. I don't know. I can't tell people not to do that, but it seems to me to be a very compartmentalizing business.
I mean, I can't really think of an answer to that in the sense that the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I think many men in my generation, is that we've been challenged by women. And I actually think, even though that challenge can be really painful at times, I actually think that challenge should continue.
But how can we challenge in a way that is productive and not counterproductive and not in danger of being oppressive? I'm saying this, you know, because I am the mother of a son, and I don't want him to be... Can you imagine being my son? Can you imagine?
There is actually
on the psychiatrist's couch at 30 going, my mother cared about everyone else's human rights. You know, anyway... But that's the nightmare scenario, by the way. Yeah.
There is an organic example, and I really hesitate to mention it here because, you know, nobody thinks much of any church. But the truth is the Anglican Church, for all its faults, women are basically keeping the thing going. I mean, they may not be bishops, but there's virtually hardly a parish in the country which isn't, in the end, completely kept going by women. And women priests, because there are no men, are taking over very rapidly, particularly in the countryside. And you should see how they've done it. I mean, actually, in fact, they'll have to have women bishops because there aren't enough men to have bishops. That's a very interesting thing, because you'd think that that would be the most hidebound and impossible place possible. But by sheer force of capacity, of depth of humanity, women have made it in the Church of England. That's a very strange achievement, because the Church of England is just about bust. But, you know, there it is. It's there, and it's a very interesting thing to study.
But how do those women... That's all great. That's just like... That's great. And that's like women holding families together and countries together. But how do those women then feel when their church won't even accord them the respect that they could be bishops?
Very angry.
I mean, this is the problem, isn't it? Because it's all true. Everything you say, John, is true.
But they'll get there. They will get there. There will be women bishops. I mean, there'll be a woman bishop this year or next year, without any doubt at all. And it was overwhelmed by a complete lunatic male.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful. I have a very. I thought you were going to say, and that's what we'd like women to stop.
No.
Because obviously it is an elephant, or let's not. It's in the room is this elephant called God. That at the moment, under most scriptures, all scriptures, as far as I know, is a man. So we have an awful lot of issues that are mythological and very, very prominent in society that reasserts over and over again that actually the story has to begin from male. You know, the rib, the Adam's rib, etc. So,
what am I going to do on Tuesday when I stand on a roof in Rome looking for white smoke? The conclave is going in 115 men trying to sort out a man to run a church of 1.5 billion people. I mean, how can you behave properly? I mean, you might say something. I mean, it's an absolutely fantastic thought, isn't it, that this is going to happen. 115 people, men, are going to get together and do some hocus pocus and come up with a man.
Yes, and you'd think, wouldn't you, that the number of intelligent men there are on the planet, they'd all write a letter all together and go, just stop it now.
Yeah, but once again, we're up against power. Yeah, we're up against power.
We're too insecure to do that.
Well, I think that more and more men are actually doing that. And I think one of the things that...
Well, when did you last write a letter complaining?
Complaining...
About women not getting a look in to something that you had access to?
I make my living speaking out against oppression, speaking out against patriarchy. So that's what I do all the time.
I know, but we're asking men to write letters in a very odd sort of way. The written word is the thing we're scared of people finding out.
I think this is all big political stuff, but there's stuff that everyone can do in their workplace and in their family and in their life as well. I mean, presumably, John, you're an incredibly important figure in broadcasting. You are Jon Snow, Snow Mail, Channel 4 News. Presumably, you can make
M-A-I-L.
You can make it a personal responsibility to promote women in the office. I promote women in my office. Liberty is basically a feminist conspiracy. It's not even a secret. It's not even a secret.
But I just want to point out that John's here.
No, great. No, I'm all about John.
Listen, Shami, I came here with enormous trepidation.
No, you shouldn't.
Well-placed.
It's a great. This is a wonderful festival, isn't it? And can I just say that Jude Kelly is an absolute heroine for making it happen.
Thank you. Okay, now we've got a couple of minutes left, and I want to hand over to Michael because he's got something he wants to say about roles. And I want to kick off by this. I know that my son, who is a bit kind of miffed that he hasn't really ever been given full access to the football-y side of himself, I just say it that way, that it's quite an interesting issue about maleness and what maleness grows into. But I know that your proposition is that we should be questioning the very notion of difference, and at least that's what I understand.
Yeah, I mean, I believe in difference and the incredible diversity of people. But a bit facetiously in the description of the program, talking about the men are from Mars, women are from Venus stuff, which is this sort of this U.S. industry of this guy John Gray, and the truth is we're from the same planet. But I think that one of the exciting things that's happening to me, and I think it's happening now, not to me, but happening now, and it goes back to your question, is I think that a lot of what we're learning from the neuroscientists is that that old nature-nurture dichotomy is actually starting to break down. Because I think what we're learning now is that the thing about the human brain and the way it develops by just sort of soaking in the social environment and internalizing that, it means that we become gendered. And so we don't have male and female brains, but this intricate process within families, within these nurturing environments or not nurturing environments, means that actually our brains do get reshaped. Our brains do get reshaped. So to go back to your first point of these images of how your stature in the world, this is just the crap that we soak up. The stuff that John was referring to is just the crap that we soak up. And we actually become men, we become women. We don't become male or female, we're born with that. And so our biology is that we have the capacity to become gendered. So it's not this nature versus nurture. Our nature is the ability for nurture to have this impact on us. And so one of the things that I think that we need as men, and I talked about the challenge, is the encouragement to help reshape that. And I think the number one way we're going to reshape that in the next generation is by transforming fatherhood. Reshape it from my side of things. Because I think that what is going to happen is that one way we can engage men, you're right, this would be a difficult sell to many men. But where we can reach a lot of men is not just sort of saying, we're going to challenge your ideas of manhood, but appealing to them in a very positive way, appealing to our brothers as fathers, as caregivers, and by throwing men in, by saying we need to rewrite our laws on parental leave, so we mandate a certain amount of time that would be just taken by fathers. And what we do through that is that we begin to recast our conceptions of not only manhood, but about womanhood. So women are going to have to challenge themselves and say, gosh, I guess he can do, just like you've challenged us to say, guys, all the things that you thought only we could do, you can do as well. Well, that challenge is also there. So all that nurturing stuff that I think many women still feel, well, this is still women's stuff. There's a bit of a challenge there, because I think that the challenge has to be to men to, let's face it, I think that in terms of nurturing and kids, there's only two jobs that we're bad at. we're really bad at getting pregnant, and we absolutely suck at breastfeeding. But besides that, so that's something that I think we need from women. We need that encouragement, and we can give that to each other, but we need changes in laws, we need changes in policy, and we need support for that.
And on that note, Michael and I want to thank Jon and Shami for joining us in this conversation between the sexes. Thank you.
Thank you.